All right, comrades, so I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about the United Nations itself, and then we'll get into what happened on Wednesday and since then with the International Action Center. When the UN was formed, many were extremely hopeful about what it would become. It was created in the direct aftermath of the Second World War, when the Soviet Union had been aligned with the United States against fascism. Around the world, and in Europe especially, communist parties were rapidly growing, and the Soviet Union was very well respected. The progressive sentiments of the people of the world are largely reflected in a number of the UN documents. For example, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights contains the following passage, and this is from Article 23. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Everyone has, without any discrimination, the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection, and everyone has the right to form and join trade unions. Now, obviously, the leaders of the United States certainly aren't following the UN Declaration of Human Rights when it says we have the right to a job, we have the right to an income, and we have the right to join unions. But that's what the UN Charter says. At the time the UN was formed, the rhetoric was that it would be a place where all countries would be treated with respect and dignity. These great hopes that came out of the anti-fascist struggle, however, were soon disappointed. Despite the rhetoric, the UN ended up being dominated by the United States and other imperialist countries, and proving to be so with its tactics. In 1947, the UN approved the creation of the Zionist settler regime in Israel and displacing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. The United Nations also led the attack along with the United States on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea that led to the death of over 3 million people. Now, the UN has a lot of official rules and regulations, but the overwhelming majority of the time, the billionaires that run the Western imperialist countries get exactly what they want. But the United Nations is still something they would probably prefer to do without. It's kind of like the courts. You know, the ruling class would love to be able to just have their cops go out and grab people and take them away and kill them, and they do that. But they do have a legal system, and in some cases, even though that legal system is so corrupt and disgusting and awful, there are instances where, because you have the courtroom, there's able to be, because there's enough of a progressive struggle, that some victory can be won in the courtroom. And so they'd prefer to get rid of the United Nations if they could, but they have it set up so they can claim that there's some kind of justice in the world that they control. You know, the UN is controlled by the imperialist ruling class, and it's interesting to note that the very land that the UN is on was actually donated by the Rockefellers. The Rockefeller family actually provided the land that the UN's on. I mean, that shows you how much it's controlled by the ruling class of this world. But the billionaire class doesn't exactly like to stomach everything that goes on in the United Nations. For example, last week there was a meeting of the countries that have signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And one of the main speakers at that conference was Zara Nemati, and she's an Iranian woman who's won a gold medal in the Paralympics for archery. And she called out the United States because the United States has not signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And she called them out, you know. In addition, the United States has never signed the UN Declaration of the Rights of Children. And I think part of the reason for that might be that, and this is a direct line from it, the child shall have the right to adequate nutrition, housing, recreation, and medical services. Yeah, it says children should have the right to eat and be taken care of by a doctor, all things that obviously don't exist in the United States, so why would they sign it? So now on to what's happened this week. Now the Syrian Arab Republic is a member state of the United Nations. It pays over $1 million every year to the UN. Last week, they held their presidential election, and Sarah Flounders and the International Action Center, working with the Syrian American Forum and other organizations, arranged for a delegation to go to Syria to observe the elections. Now, they came back. Our comrade Scott from Philadelphia was part of that delegation that observed, went all through Syria watching the voting that went on. And on Wednesday, the Syrian mission to the United Nations arranged a press conference at the UN, including the whole delegation, 5 people from the United States who observed the elections. Now, every member state has the right to call a press conference in the briefing room at the UN. It's part of your rights as a member state in the United Nations. And all of these briefings they're not just there at the UN, but they webcast them live on the web. And there are all kinds of people all over the world, reporters and journalists, that watch the webcast and write down everything that happened. So 5 minutes into this webcast of Syria and the observers of the elections, 5 minutes in, the webcast went down, got cut off. Now, this isn't the first time this has actually happened to the Syrian mission to the United Nations. On June 7th, when the Syrian ambassador Bashar Jafari was speaking, it also happened. He started speaking and it went down. Now, keep in mind that Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has not had a single meeting with Bashar Jafari, the Syrian representative. However, he has met with Ahmed Jarba, who is a leader of the insurgent groups that are tearing up the country right now. Now, what was this press conference that was shut down on Wednesday? What were they reporting on? They were reporting on the elections, right? They were reporting on that. And they were reporting on the fact that Syria came together, despite the fact that there are bombs going off, that people are dying, over 150,000 people killed, the fact that millions of refugees. In spite of that, the people came together and they voted. And they voted overwhelmingly to re-elect their president, Bashar Assad. And Comrade Scott from Philadelphia, he made clear in his remarks, he said, look, democracy means the will of the people. And what he saw on the street was people overwhelmingly wanting to vote and re-elect their president. That was the case. And they went to every voting place, and there were people not just representing Bashar Assad, but representing the other two major candidates. And as far as they could tell, you know, it was a fair election. And it didn't just take place in Syria. In Beirut, Syrian refugees practically shut down the city, lining up to vote. And there were Syrians from all over the world who went to Syria just so they could vote for President Assad. You know, there were people who, some of who had even been part of the protest movement against Assad, but now they see what these insurgents, this grouping backed by the United States, it's going around killing people, and now they went to Syria because they wanted to vote and make clear they weren't going to let these terrorists backed by the United States destroy their country, basically. So it was overwhelmingly clear to all of the observers that the winner of the election was President Bashar Assad, without question. Well, it makes sense why they would make sure that a press conference saying this and stating these obvious facts didn't get on the webcast, because this is what Ban Ki-moon, General Secretary Ban Ki-moon of the UN, actually spoke this morning at the Asia Society. Now, the Asia Society is a think tank for the billionaires. It's here in New York, and it was actually set up by the Rockefellers, I believe, and they actually, this is what he said. And he said, the presidential election, which was held this month, was a further blow to the political process. The election did not meet even minimal standards of credible voting, and has created a fact that runs counter to the Geneva Communique. Well, the interesting thing about that is he doesn't back this up with anything. He didn't list a single thing that they did that made this election illegitimate. He just declared, oh, it was an illegitimate election. And, of course, his words are going out as the official thing, but the Syrians never got an opportunity to defend themselves. So after raising some hell and complaining, the video of the UN meeting was put on the website. So the video's up there after we complained and the Syrian mission complained. And at the noon briefing today, they still insisted, oh, it was just technical difficulties, even though it's happened so many times before. But they did apologize and they put it back up there. The United States has been trying to use the UN as a place to facilitate its attack on Syria. For example, they're pushing for what's called an arms embargo. Now, an arms embargo would make it illegal for any country to sell or send weapons to Syria. And there was a press conference today, and Russian Ambassador Vitaly Churkin spoke about this, because they did this to Libya during the war on Libya. They passed an arms embargo. And it sounds really nice. There's fighting going on. No one sent any guns there. When they passed an arms embargo against Libya, that prevented Gaddafi and the Libyan government from buying any weapons or anything, but somehow the US-backed insurgents and all of them kept getting their guns. Their guns kept coming. And they're also pushing for an arms embargo in Ukraine. And Russian Ambassador Vitaly Churkin says, we're not going to go for this. And they vetoed this arms embargo against Ukraine, and as well as any talk of one against Syria. Now, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is loudly calling for the UN to be restructured, and to be restructured in a way that oppressed countries are actually given representation. So, the fact that the International Action Center was able to conduct this meeting in coalition with the Syrian American Forum and the Syrian Mission to the United Nations against the wishes of the billionaires was a big victory. When we think about it, the global class war is raging every day. In Syria, in Ukraine, and other countries, people are picking up guns and fighting against imperialism. In Cuba, in People's Korea, they have done away with capitalism, and they've begun the construction of socialism. Here in the United States, we as members of the global working class must see ourselves as the U.S. division in this global battle for power. We must work to support those who are fighting against imperialism. And we've got to convince the workers and the oppressed here in this country to stop waving the flag, to stop supporting the government of the billionaire class, and stand with their brothers and sisters who are fighting imperialism around the world. Thank you.